welcome to another Gray Matter live stream. Well, I'm wearing my hat today that expresses the sentiment that many people in my home province of Alberta have about what's going on in the country right now. And frankly, who could blame them? It seems like a hot mess, especially what's going on in Ottawa. And one of the main themes that is really causing a great deal of dissension and discord and misery in our country is the question of mass immigration. And I'm very blessed to have on our live stream today. We're hopefully going to have a kind of a roundtable discussion similar to the one we had recently with Viva Fry and our good friend Bruce Party. Have another friend of mine, I consider him a friend. Hopefully he's not offended by that. Peyman Askari, a brilliant podcaster in lay terms. He's on. Also a man that I've been introduced to by him, Jayant Bhandari. And Max Bernier, for my money, the only small C conservative leader on the national political stage. So we're going to have kind of a roundtable discussion on the question of immigration, the who, what, when, where, why, and how it's going wrong. And the people we have on the show today, I assure you, are going to have some very, very deep insights into this. Peyman Askari is a distinguished entrepreneur and academic, the bachelor's in computer science and a PhD in computational neuroscience. After paying checks to the Receiver General for 5 years running his business, Peyman became increasingly critical of the Western welfare state. He believes that true happiness stems from productivity and individual contribution. I wholeheartedly agree, rather than dependence on governmental systems. He's a passionate advocate for libertarian values, supports the preservation of property rights, principles of federalism to limit governmental overreach, and strong national borders to protect both individual freedoms and national integrity. His unique blend of technical expertise and philosophical insight makes him a powerful voice for liberty and self-reliance. As I said, also the host of a tremendous podcast called In Lay Terms. You should check out. Thanks for being on here with us today, Peyman.
No, thanks for having me, Leighton, and thanks for considering me a friend.
Yeah, right. And Mr. Bhandari, Jayant Bhandari, who I've just met and looking forward to hearing more from him. He is a renowned business tycoon and financial markets expert. He's known for his incisive views on global immigration and the role of religion in society. Despite his East Indian heritage and immigrant background, Jay offers a critical perspective on immigration in the West, engaging audiences with thought-provoking insights. He's a secular thinker, also recognizes the civilizing influence that religions like Christianity and Islam have historically provided, while cautioning that without such moral frameworks, society risks descending into chaos. He is the esteemed host of the annual Capitalism and Morality Conference in Vancouver that I hope to attend. I plan to attend with his gracious invitation. And he passionately promotes liberty in the markets and freedom of thought. Thanks for being here today, Jay. It's a pleasure to meet you and to have you today in this conversation.
Leighton, pleasure to meet you too, and thanks for inviting me to this conversation.
Right. So where I'd like to start, we're going to get into immigration. Hopefully Max is going to be able to join us. But Peyman, you posted something out last night that I caught. I think it was last night, which really struck my interest. And I wondered whether, and I wanted to ask Max this, I wonder whether he lays in bed at night sometimes staring at the ceiling, wondering that if he would have just, sort of kowtow to the, pardon the pun, kowtow to the Quebec dairy cartel and become the leader back in 2019 instead of Andrew Scheer, if, he would be our prime minister now, we would have been saved from all this mess. But you posted something out about Andrew Scheer, and you described him as uncharismatic, which I think was being kind. He doesn't really learn how to speak properly in public. You say that, you were wondering out loud about what is happening in Ottawa now, because Mr. Scheer came out with what you described as an earth-shattering announcement that, in fact, Parliament, the normal everyday business of Parliament, if anyone can figure out what that is these days, seems like a lot of shouting, but all of that is going to be set aside now in order to investigate and get to the bottom of this deep landscape and panoply of liberal government corruption. So I'm curious to know what were your thoughts here? You put out a very detailed tweet. If people want to see the full tweet, they should check it out. But you said, I'm not quite ready to believe that there are enough people, good people in government, to bring about this kind of change. After all, these are the same folks who stood by quietly while our rights were trampled during COVID. The Speaker of the House doesn't exactly inspire trust either. He comes across as corrupt to me, and just a gut feeling, though. Although that gut feeling has some substantiation. But you said you're wondering who's really benefiting from all of this, and that question that you raised also ties into our discussion of immigration. So maybe we could start with you. You could explain kind of what you were getting at with that tweet that you put up.
Sure thing, Leighton. People have lost. Getting some audio feedback loop. People have lost faith in all of these institutions. So I mentioned what's happened during COVID. There's a perception out there that the legislators, the government officials, none of them really stood up for the rule of law. None of them stood up for people. So when something like this happens in Parliament, which, technically speaking, it's the right thing. There's been allegations of corruption. There's been so many ethics violations. Nothing's happened. And then finally somebody apparently did the right thing. And they said, all right, we're going to essentially put a stop to government until we get to the bottom of this. Like that should have people out on the streets cheering, applauding,
right?
Because it seems like progress. But I'm looking at this, I'm like, well, these are the bad guys. And now they're claiming to do the right thing. So they must be doing it for a bad reason. That was my point.
Interesting. Jayant, I wanted to get your take. I listened to a recent PragerU short video by Konstantin Kistin, who is an immigrant. As a child, he immigrated to England from Russia. It's a very fascinating perspective on immigration and the incredible damage that it has wrought in Europe. But he basically the context of and the title of the piece he gave was why multiculturalism is a bad idea. And you seem to agree with that. I wonder if you could sort of give us your take on that. Why is multiculturalism such a bad idea?
It doesn't work. We have 200 countries on the planet, and there is not one country where multiculturalism has succeeded. You look at a country like India, which is a multi-ethnic society, and it's ridden with ethnic conflicts. You look at France, which has been multi-ethnic for a long time, and there are conflicts between different ethnicities. As time has passed, we have seen the same thing happening in the Western society as well. So the fact remains that this superstitious belief in the West, which has outgrown as a result of political correctness, that somehow we are all human beings and we can all work together and we can all assimilate, is an erroneous idea. It is not based on a legitimate evidence. There's no evidence that multi-ethnic societies work. The United States indeed was a melting pot, but it was a melting pot only as long as people to the United States were coming from Europe. So yes, they came from Germany, United Kingdom, Ireland, Spain, etc., etc. And those eventually, over a few generations, assimilated as Americans. But you cannot expect the same from people from other ethnicities. The proof is for all of us to see. There are ethnic conflicts wherever we have multiculturalism, and the minorities always end up holding the victim. You can give them as much as you want to, but they will always hold the victim card because that's what gets them the most resources. Again, multiculturalism and diversity simply does not work. There's no evidence.
Mm-hmm. I want, just as a follow-up question, I've heard you comment on another podcast, in particular about South Asian people in terms of assimilation. And of course, we don't want to pick on them or sound xenophobic, but you obviously have a unique perspective on this. I heard you say off camera that you left India to escape Indians. Is there something particular about South Asians that make them less likely to assimilate to Western culture?
Country, the society of South Asia, and that includes Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, Nepal. These people don't really have a moral fabric. There's nothing like 10 commandments culturally in that society. Now, Leighton, it's something very, very difficult for someone who grew up in the Western society to understand it, because people who grew up in the West tend to think that 10 commandments and a sense of right and wrong and the concept of reason are a part of nature. They
Right.
aren't. They came to exist over several millennia in Europe. So, assuming that you can somehow incorporate the concept of moral values and the concept of reason in these third world people, even over centuries, isn't going to work out. And this is what frustrated Christian missionaries and colonizers, that they could not really inculcate the concept of morality, the concept of values, the concept of honor, the concept of integrity, discipline, honesty among people of the third world. And this, you can go on and on looking at the history and reading the history of European colonization and missionaries to try to understand how much frustration these people who were sometimes extraordinarily devoted, they went all the way from Sweden to the heart of Africa to try to change the local people. Because the problem with the third world people is that they are resource acquirers. They are driven by materialism. And they haven't really graduated to the concept of morality and reason.
So,
Millennium.
go ahead. Peyman, I want to ask you, now I saw a recent census data that listed the cities with the largest foreign-born populations. Brampton is ranked number 19, Mississauga number 8, Toronto number 6, Surrey number 29, Vancouver number 25, Montreal number 8. This to me is something that is very concerning, and that Max Bernier, the leader of the PPC party, for which you're a candidate, has been talking about very much in the news. I wonder if you could state what you see or the position of the PPC on this, and also maybe we could turn to Max, who I understand he's joining us via audio, so he could explain kind of how the PPC's position on immigration is different from what the Liberal position is, and what is the CPC position, which to my mind is like the difference between Coke and Pepsi.
It's funny. I would have expected Vancouver to be number one on that list. I find that surprising. I think there's two different things going on. So cities like Brampton and Surrey, that's the term we should use for that is a ghetto. So not in a negative sense, but in the sense that when immigrants come in sufficient quantities, they like to hang out with people that they understand. They have a cultural background. They share the same language. When you bring in too many immigrants, then what happens is you're essentially creating a ghetto where the local population says we don't really want to have anything to do with these people. It could be East Indian, it could be Iranian, it could be Armenian. That's the reason why immigration is supposed to be measured, so that you can integrate and assimilate and get them to adopt your culture. In Vancouver, it's a little different. Vancouver, they've like 100% leaned into this concept of multiculturalism. So what they're doing is they're rejecting the concept of culture. In Canada's culture it's bicultural. It's supposed to be French and English. People, you're not even allowed to use the word Anglo anymore, and Franco, it's just in Quebec. So my whole thesis, my whole theory is that there is no nation. Like, a nation is a consequence of a culture, and if we've rejected our culture and we don't have, like, what are we defending? That to me is multiculturalism. It's like this virus that's invaded the country, and it's decimated our immune system. We can't. We have nothing to defend or fight back.
Yeah, a nation needs borders, doesn't it?
Well, that too. I mean, the whole concept of a nation, it's just imaginary, right? So you're saying within these imaginary borders, we're gonna defend this culture. But if you get rid of this culture and you have nothing to defend, then it makes sense for globalists to say, we don't need borders either. So they're all kind of related.
So the position of the Liberal Party of Canada, and for that matter, the CPC, seems to buy into the globalist position of open borders and that mass migration, the people should be able to move around the world as of right. But the PPC's position on this is different, isn't it? And how is it different?
Well, I think the PPC takes a strong sort of nationalist position, and I know that's a word that's been dirtied thanks to the efforts of Adolf Hitler. But it goes back to what I said. Like, we believe that we should start with a culture. We should start with, an understanding that there are certain things that we agree on. Those are typically inalienable rights. I add property rights to that. Security of the person, freedom of speech. And then you try to defend your borders and enforce those within those borders. Whereas the globalists, they treat everything sort of like the urban model. Like, it doesn't matter, you got transient people. It doesn't matter if they live in Vancouver or Toronto or Singapore. They're just, units of production. You don't really need a culture. Everybody around the world has the same culture. You go to a bar, you meet a girl. So they're treating people as units of production as opposed to sovereign individuals. And that's where the PPC differs.
Yeah, and this sort of ties into something I read recently, a quotation from Marine Le Pen, the French leader, who said, really, this whole dichotomy between left and right isn't really precise anymore. Really, the real battle is between globalists and patriots, patriotism being, another way of saying nationalism. Do we have Max on the line yet, Michael? Perhaps not. Okay. So perhaps, Jayant, I could ask you about this. What is your take on why there is this globalist push for migration to the West? Why do we have so many people coming to the West? Because, I heard Douglas Murray recently comment, a person could be in a person from England or Canada could be in India or China for generations and never be considered Indian or Chinese. But if somebody from India or China lands in Canada or the United States or Great Britain, they're instantly, a British or a Canadian or American. So what is behind this globalist push, in your opinion, for mass migration to the West?
Yeah, this is absolutely crazy, Leighton, that the Western society has committed suicide by letting in so many people to dilute their culture, their religion, their values. This is mind-boggling, because you have destroyed the whole fabric of the society by bringing in people who you don't really understand, who won't accept your values, who won't accept your religion, who won't assimilate in your society. And now the Western society is rapidly moving towards a 50% non-European ethnic majority society. So there's a whole layers and layers of issues here. Firstly, you accepted democracy, which meant that you gave the vote to elect rulers to the bottom 51% of the population. You accepted something called political correctness, which means that you can no longer talk about sensitive issues. And sensitive issues are the most important issues for our society and politics today. Right. So unfortunately, our mouth have been shut closed. And a lot of people have also become relatively intellectually lazy, because they have their comforts in Canada and in the United States. And they know that if they speak up, they will lose their jobs, they will lose their friends and family, and people will be afraid of being associated with them. But now that we started having people from outside, all the immigrants, political parties, and that includes the Liberal Party, NDP, and Conservative Party, they need to pander to these minority swing votes, because those swing votes make a massive difference to the final results. And you can see that in the United States. Trump has already softened his immigration policy, because over the last 4 years, maybe 10 million new American citizens have come into existence, and a vast majority of them are from the third world. So Trump has to start pandering to these people. So I think this is a vicious cycle in place for the Western world.
The payment. Now, I saw Max post out something about the rising popularity of your party, the PPC, among young Canadians, and I think part of this is for people under the age of 20. I think that the unemployment rate is over 20%, and this is connected to migration, of course, because a lot of the jobs, the entry-level jobs, if you go and apply at Tim Hortons, McDonald's, or Walmart, for example, and you are not part of a quote-unquote racial minority, they're not even going to look at you. So do you think that's part of the reason why the PPC has a rising popularity among young people in Canada, or are there other reasons that you think why the PPC is appealing to young people?
Yeah, I would say a big part of the reason is that their ability to support themselves financially has been stripped of them, and they principally blame the quote unquote boomer class. But it goes back to bad policy. Like, I agree with Jayant that it makes no sense. We've committed suicide by bringing in all of these people from the outside, and now they've become a voter base. So now we have to pander to them. But that doesn't explain why would you implement these, let's just call it what it is, racist policies, where it says basically if you're straight white male, you're not going to get employed. So when you do that, those two things where you're bringing in all of these people, and people don't like change, especially when it happens quickly, and then you implement these racist policies and you're wiping out these, the young generation's ability to support themselves, they're going to get angry. And they're going to channel that anger at something. And what we're seeing right now is a lot of people, especially online, there's a rise in prejudice. It's racial prejudice, but it's a rise in prejudice. And rather than, if we had responsible people in government, they'd say, okay, this is our fault. We brought in too many people. We embraced multiculturalism, and then we implemented these racist policies. But that's not what they're doing. They're doubling down, and they're saying, oh, no, there's this underclass of racist white young men engaging in hate speech, so we need hate speech legislation. So it's just like a doubling down, and it's an escalation of things.
Jayant, you mentioned something earlier I want to come back to, and some of the implications of mass migration to the West are obvious. Things like impacts on healthcare, education, infrastructure, the economy, all of these things. Some of them seem pretty obvious, but you mentioned something that's more subtle, and that is that it appears as though as we have more and more people migrating to the West from other parts of the world, there's a corresponding impact upon free speech, and we have a rising censorship. Do you think these two things are connected?
Well, absolutely. As I mentioned earlier, Leighton, that a lot of people who are now coming to the Western world are not coming for liberty. They are coming here for material conveniences, which means that they are not interested in Western values. They are not interested in Western civilization. And freedom of speech is immaterial to them. In fact, Leighton, I might go as far as by saying that a lot of these people will want to create exactly the same ecology that they left behind. The ecology that they left behind, and I'm talking about cultural, environmental ecology that they left behind, was a product of their thinking. They want, and I like to say it this way, that they like the smell, chaos, noise, all kinds of things that you think are a result of lack of civic sense, civic delivery by the governments in those third world countries. But the problem is that these people bring in those same ways in the ghettos of the first world. So, and lack of free speech is one of them. They hate free speech, which is one of the things that they believe in. They are materialistic people, and you have to inculcate Western values in them, which means respect for free speech, respect for the other people's personal space, respect for the society. So there's so many things that do not come unless you have certain civilizational values.
Hmm. I see that Max Bernier has joined us. Welcome, Max, to the conversation. I'm sure you've been catching up here. How are you? Great to see you.
Fine. Yes, fine. Thank you very much. Sorry, I was a little bit late. As you can see, I'm
Mhm.
traveling, but I can be with you for 10 or 15 minutes
Oh,
now.
great. Well, I want to get your take on something that's happening in Ottawa right now that Peyman actually posted about. Your former political adversary, Mr. Scheer, it's just who sort of underwhelms us with his charisma. Um, he actually had a kind of an earth-shattering press conference saying that the normal business of Parliament is going to be shut down to delve into the massive levels of liberal scandal. And I'm curious to get your take on this. Do you think that we're actually going to get a sincere investigation and discussion of all this corruption that's going on in the Liberal government? They seem very, very close to teetering and falling over after some pushing here. But do you think this is going to result in anything, or is this more just political theater?
I believe it's just only political. The conservative doesn't want to speak about the real issues that we are having here in our country that is affecting us, like mass immigration that we are discussing today. Uh, so they try to. We know that the Trudeau government is a corrupt government. We want to have an election as soon as possible, but it won't happen because the NDP or the Bloc Québécois will support Trudeau. So we will have to wait until October 2025 for an election. And yes, Trudeau was one of the worst government uh, that we had in the past, and so they try to be sure that Canadians will remember that. But what I want to do, I want to speak about, the elephant in the room. That is the mass immigration that is
Hmm.
affecting our country. But Poilievres and the fake conservatives won't speak about that. Actually, when we speak about mass immigration, uh, we just have to speak about the numbers. The data are telling us that the growth of our population last year was 3.2%. And the average growth of the population in the OECD countries, in the Western countries, last year was 0.2%. So that's mass immigration. And here in Canada, 100% of the growth of our population is due to immigration. So, and if you add to that our big cities, Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver, Surrey, they have about half of their population that are not native Canadians. And actually, all across the country, 20% of our population are not native Canadians. And the average of the Western countries, it's about 10%. So, yes, we have a problem here in Canada with mass immigration. We are not able to integrate them into our society. And add to that the Multiculturalism Act, the fact that we are telling them, keep your culture, keep your values, and you don't have to integrate into our country. And by the way, the federal government will give you money to celebrate, for example, the new Chinese year, to celebrate your culture. So that is a recipe for disaster. And that's happening right now in Canada.
Hmm.
Add to that the fact that we have uh, foreign temporary workers that are not temporary, and that's another way for them to be a permanent residence. Same thing with the fake international students. So all that, and we have the inflation in Canada. We are in a recession. The numbers are not telling us that, but Canadians understand that time are very difficult. So we need to solve the immigration problem, and we, the People's Party of Canada, is the only party that is speaking about that. And actually, it's not new for us. We said that 6 years ago, and
Hmm.
we said that we must end mass immigration. And we were right at that time, and we are even more right today. So, what the conservatives try to do is not to speak about the elephant in the room, the immigration, mass immigration challenges that we have. They don't want to speak about deporting the illegals. So it's what Canadians want. When you look at the survey and polling, more than 68% of the population are saying enough is enough in immigration. And half of them are immigrants. They came here a couple of years ago following the rules. But now, if you want to come to Canada, if you don't speak English or French, it's okay. But before that, when we had a real immigration system, you had to speak English and French because it would be easier for you to be part of our society. Now it's not this. It's not. We're not asking them to be able to speak one of our two official languages, and that's why we have ghettos across the country. And these people are not integrating into our society, and more
Hmm.
Canadians are fed up with that.
Hmm.
So that's what I believe the conservative
Hmm.
won't speak about that.
Max, you posted a video over the summer that kind of went viral where you confronted some, I believe they were foreign students who were trying to stay, and you confronted them and said, "Look, you really need to go home because there's young people in this country who need these jobs." And this ties into a tweet that you put out yesterday, where you said the PPC is by far the most popular among younger Canadians. And I think it's fair to say that actually your party is the only one that's really standing up for young Canadians. The other parties don't seem to be very interested in what's happening to young people and their ability to get jobs, their ability to get educated, their ability to own homes and things like that, to have a better life than their parents had, which used to be really the promise that we all grew up with in this country. Is that true? That's something that you're talking about a lot, isn't it? That the future for young people in Canada is being jeopardized by this mass immigration.
Absolutely. The video that you are talking about, it's the one that I did when I was in PI, and we had at that time a protest from fake Indian students who came here and to study, and now they want to stay here. But if you have a permit to be an international student, usually in the past, after when you have your diploma, you are leaving the country and you go back to your country of origin. Now they changed the program at the federal level. They allowed these fake international students to work at the same time when they're studying. It must not be allowed. You come here to study and that's it. And so they're working, and after that, they don't want to leave the country. They want to stay here. And I told that young guy, no, after when you have your diploma, you must leave the country. And if you're not leaving the country, you must be deported. I told him that in his face, and that's the reality. But with the Trudeau government and the Poliev official opposition, they're looking at these people as potential voters, and they're
Mhm.
pandering to them. So that's why we are where we are today. We need to work for Canadians. I understand that Poliev and Trudeau are more interested to work for foreigners than for their own native-born Canadians. It's immoral, and we must not tolerate that.
Mhm. And that really that makes the PPC position really unique among the parties that are available that people can vote for. One last question, Max, before we let you go, and that is with all that's happening right now, it seems as though there's increasing pressure on this Liberal government to call an election. The Bloc Québécois is pressuring them again. Really seems to have them over a barrel. Do you think that we're going to get an early election, or do you think that Justin Trudeau is going to hold on to power until October of next year, like a little kid, clutching his teddy bear at night?
Yeah, it's too bad. Like a lot of Canadians, we are ready for an election. I hope we can have an election as soon as possible. but I strongly believe that it won't happen.
Mm.
Why? Because the NDP is not that popular. If there's an election today, they will have fewer candidates elected, and so that's not in their advantage. But at the same time, money talks, and for a couple of NDP members of parliament, they want to have their pension, and they will have to wait until October 2025 to have their pension. So
Hmm.
that's why I believe it will only be in October 2025.
Mm. That's really a sad state of affairs in our country when so many Canadians really want an election. So, Peyman, I want to ask you: the PPC is gathering steam, getting ready for an election whenever it comes. How will the platform, the electoral platform, the policy picture for the PPC look different than, say, the CPC whenever we get to an election, especially on this issue of mass immigration, but also on other issues? Because I mean, this is something that people talk about all the time. Splitting the vote, but actually, that's kind of a misguided way of looking at it. Because as I see it, and correct me if this is wrong, I mean, there really isn't much symmetry between what the PPC is saying in terms of policy and the CPC.
Yeah, the accusation that you'd be splitting the vote if you voted for the People's Party, it's basically a way to, it's like a sledgehammer that they're using to beat us over the head with. They're trying to intimidate people to not vote for the People's Party. But the way I look at it, you have to vote your convictions. You can't just surrender your vote to a party because they're calling you names like a vote splitter. And the reason I'm not running for the Conservative Party is because they have no platform. Like, they just look to polling. Like I'm a businessman. I'm a business guy. I'm a researcher. And when I want to enter into a venture, I look at a one pager and I make up my mind. You look at the Conservative Party, there's nothing there. I look at the People's Party and the platform makes sense. That's why I joined it. And moving to answer your question, like moving forward as we're getting closer to the election, we have an army of dedicated patriotic volunteers like myself or just regular volunteers that are perfecting this policy, this platform, and they're contributing to it, they're adding to it. So you're going to see a lot of changes. As one example, in the revision conference, our national conference we just held in Ottawa, Max unveiled that he's looking to put a full moratorium on immigration until the housing crisis sort of normalizes. And surprise, surprise, recently the Conservative Party they took over a portion of that as well.
Jay, I want to come back to you because obviously you are an entrepreneur. You're a big picture economic thinker. What are the main impacts on the economy of mass migration?
The big companies truly like immigrants because they can reduce the wages, which actually hurts the lowest strata of the society, the young people, as you rightly mentioned earlier. The Tim Hortons kind of people really like immigrants who they think they can control better, who they think they can get away with paying lower wages. So indeed, big corporations are big there. The virtue signaling is big there. A lot of people in higher positions don't really understand the issues involved. They don't really understand the value of culture, the value of values. And it's easy for them to just virtue signal, pandering to what looks like a sympathetic approach to people from poor countries. So I think that is why immigration is not really opposed the way it should be. And later, I might add one more thing that there is this big conversation about legal immigration and illegal immigration. I don't really think it really matters because legal immigration is through a bureaucratic process. And I can take you to literally thousands of offices in India where you can go and have legal documents made up for you. They will cook up documents for you, fake documents for you, to apply for legal immigration. I am surprised that the Canadian government doesn't seem to know about it because the Canadian government has many offices in India, and virtually every legal application that they come across has flaws in it that has been cooked by the agents. So there's so much of illegal stuff happening behind so-called legal immigration. And a lot of students do not come to, as Mr. Bernier rightly mentioned, do not come to Canada for education. I would say a majority of them do not come for education. I have actually lectured at some of those colleges in Canada, and I tell you, they are not there for education. They are there to stay a few years in Canada so that they become eligible to apply for landed immigrant status and then be on the path to citizenship. And once they have permanent residency in Canada, they will become very nationalistic towards the country that they left behind, which is extremely ironic, very hypocritical as well.
Interesting. I saw some recent economic data of the United States that showed that in 1988, at sort of the height of the Reagan era, or at least at the end of it, when the economy was really booming in the U.S., that the birth rate in the U.S. Spiked, and it was as high as it had been since 1964 during this quote-unquote baby boom. So it seems as though there is some sort of connection between the health of the economy and people feeling good about themselves and their lives and how things are going, and the birth rate. And of course, the main impetus that we're told for mass immigration in Canada and the United States is that we have declining birth rates. But could it be, Jay, that in fact what's happening is we're deliberately destroying the economy in order to cause decline in our own birth rate? Could it be that sinister, or am I going down a rabbit hole?
Well, certainly these immigrants aren't going to take care of what you think they would be able to take care of. You are even in the best case scenario, you are merely kicking the can down the road, because the fertility rate of people who once they arrived in the Western world falls anyway. It's best to look at what Japan, China, Korea, Singapore, Hong Kong are doing, which is that they are managing to continue to exist and actually keep their societies very peaceful by not accepting any immigrants at all. There are, if you simply cannot become a refugee or immigrant to any of these countries. And despite that, these countries are doing very, very well. And I know that people complain a lot about the falling fertility rate in Japan. But the falling fertility rate of Japanese women is no different, or at least certainly not much different from what is the case among native Western women. And the people you are bringing in aren't really necessarily contributing overall as on average to your society. So what is the big deal about bringing in all these immigrants who actually as a group become welfare recipients from the society? So, and also the way the technology is evolving, a lot of problems that you think exist in the Western world can be taken care of by robots and technology, which is exactly what's happening in Japan and now increasingly in China.
Fascinating. So I want to turn the discussion to culture and the cultural impact of mass immigration. Now, Peyman and I are both Christians. I don't want to speak for him, but that's my impression based upon what he said and written. Jay, you're an atheist, but you have some very deep thoughts about culture in relation to religion and its importance. So, Peyman, starting with you, what are the cultural implications of mass immigration? Why should we be concerned in Canada and the West broadly about mass immigration and the destruction of Western culture? Why does that matter?
I think they've muddied the water. So when people think about culture, they think like a Christmas tree, or they think Thanksgiving, but they never think, parliamentary supremacy. They never think like Anglo versus Franco. They don't realize that culture is more than just the food you eat and the clothes that you wear. So when I say they, I'm talking about the left, but they do this all the time to win an argument. They try to get people on the defensive. So they basically try to say that, you know, Leighton, Jayant, Peyman Askari, they're racist. They don't like these people that have a different skin color. That's what they mean when they say they don't like multiculturalism. What I'm saying is we have to change the conversation to say, like, a nation is a culture. A nation is just basically the imaginary borders around a culture that we agree on. And if you start bringing in people that agree on different things, i.e. a different culture, you're going to deviate your culture. To give you an analogy, like if we're working at Coca-Cola and you start bringing in people from Subway, well, your product's going to change from a beverage to a sandwich. And that's what's happening here. It's happening very subtly, but it's going to come to a head at some point when you have all of these different ghettos. And that's the importance of a culture. Like, a nation needs a single culture to guide us, like a North Star.
So it reminds me of the Mark Twain quote that a man goes broke slowly, but then all at once. Jay, I want to ask you about this. Richard Dawkins was famously quoted. I think he was in a conversation with Jordan Peterson, and he said, you know, I'm not a Christian. In fact, he's a very renowned atheist, but I want to live in a society that is culturally Christian. You are not a Christian. I think you shared off camera that you're an atheist, but you see the value of a guiding religion, whether it's Christianity or Islam, to the foundational cultures in a society. Why do you say that, and why do you say that that's an important feature of a society?
So Leighton, I have been living on and off in the Western society for the last 30 years. And every day I ask myself, what is so special about the Western society? There is something extraordinarily unique about it, which makes it extremely creative, extremely innovative. People are very compassionate. They are tolerant. They want to help you out. They reason with you. If I'm on a flight in the US and I complain about the US government or US military, the other person sitting next to me, even if he's a leftist, will actually discuss with me rather than stand up and start shouting at me or attempt to lynch me. So there's something really very unique about the Western society. But also there's something even unique compared to East Asian countries. Now, I love East Asian societies, Japan, China, Singapore. They are wonderful countries. They have adopted and adapted Western ways to improve their societies. But one thing that I see lacking in East Asia is creativity, the zero to what they call 0 to 1, which is this the thinking about principles, thinking about philosophy, thinking about those very deep moral issues. That is something very, very unique to the Western society. And this took almost 3 millennia for Europeans to develop. It started with the Greeks and then Romans with Christianity. And I think this is such a complex, intricate structure of moral and civilizational fabric that it's hard to really put those into words. But again, I every day wake up and ask myself, what is so unique about the Western society? And I think a young guy in the Western world should start to be in wonder why the West created such a great civilization, which other countries simply failed to. Now, East Asian societies did manage to copy those things, but I don't think they independently evolved civilization themselves. But there's something very unique about it, and we have to really understand. I am an atheist, Leighton, but I do want to really understand what is so special about Christianity, because there is something very special about it that many people have missed out on. And since the time that we gave up on Christianity in the Western world, the Western world has started to fall apart. So there's something really, about Christianity that holds things together, keeps the moral structure of the society together.
Fascinating. So, Peyman, to turn to you and just to pick up what Jay said, it seems as though as Western civilization is in decline, totalitarianism is on the rise. Big government is on the rise. Is there a connection? And if so, what do you think it is?
Yeah, there's a connection. I kind of want to tie it all together. So this concept, we mentioned the culture. When I'm using that word, I use it loosely to include the clothes you wear, the food you eat, your type of government, and also, your faith, Christianity in the West.
Mm-hmm.
But in that is you have the family unit, and I think it's the breakup of the family unit that's a big part of this. And you see, if you look at the countrysides and the rural areas, they're faring much better. I'm talking specifically about the US, but even in
Right.
Canada, they're faring a lot better than the urban centers where you have absolute destruction of the family unit. So all this crime you see in these urban centers is because of its fatherlessness, but just a breakup of the family unit. The pursuit of, vice and the appetites of the flesh in the urban centers. It's because of the breakup of the family unit. Like I myself, I'm not married. I don't have kids, but there's like a calming effect. There's a disciplining effect of having a wife and children. There's a disciplining effect of your neighbors know who you are. You're not going to have, wild parties every night with, alcohol and possibly, drugs. So I think that's what it is that ties it all together. Yes, it is Christianity and it is the erosion of Christianity, but in that Christianity, I include things like the family unit.
We had Bruce Party on my show recently, and we had kind of an interesting discussion about distinctions between conservatism and liberalism. And of course, he's an advocate of liberalism. He said that many people today who believe themselves to be conservatives because they oppose woke, progressive authoritarians are actually classical liberals because they believe in the individual and markets and the rule of law and the separation of church and state. And he says these are liberal ideas. Where I took umbrage with him is with the idea that the individual is the constituent unit of society in a free and democratic society. I think that we might be witnessing really individualism descending into nihilism, liberalism being based on humanistic ideas, as opposed to the foundational religious ones that you and I and Jay have been talking about. Would you agree with me that this is a fundamental distinction between conservatism and liberalism? That is, that conservatism sees the family as core, whereas liberalism leans towards the individual and individual rights and individual self-determination, even down to deciding whether or not you're going to mutilate your body because you think that you are trapped in the body of in that God has given you the wrong sex, and that you want to fix your body by mutilating it. It's an extreme example, but you see my point. I'm curious to get your take on this, about this kind of distinction between liberalism and conservatism. What are your thoughts there?
Questions for me?
Yes. And then I want to get Jay's take as well. Go ahead.
Yeah, Jay's probably going to have a lot better answer than me as usual. But I believe Bruce Party was talking about something different, or rather you two are interpreting it differently. What Bruce Party is saying is, he gave a really good example with homosexuality and gay marriage. He said that the left is coming in and saying you must accept gay marriage. So it's using the power of state to force us through these, LGBTQ trans flag stuff. And then the right, the conservatives. So those are the liberal argument. The conservative argument is you must not engage in gay sex. And they're using the power of the state to enforce that. And what he was saying is we're ping-ponging between these two when, the middle of the road is government should stay out of the business of what happens in the bedroom.
Interesting.
So that's my interpretation of what he was saying.
Mm-hmm.
But with respect to the other one, you're putting religion on one side, so you're the family unit, and then you call the nihilism individual on the other side.
Right.
The way I interpret it is, where is the sovereign unit lie? So does it lie with the individual or does it lie with the state? And I believe what Bruce Party was saying is it should lie with the individual, whereas the left thinks it should lie with the state. And they outright say this if you talk to them. What you're saying, I would say you're closer to Bruce Party, where you're saying, it should lie with the individual. The family unit it kind of works, but like we should move in that direction. So you start with the individual, you got the family unit, then you got your community, and then you can move to the government. So I don't really see too much difference between you and Bruce Party personally.
Okay. Jay, I want to get your take, in the context of a recent stat that says that in the United States and Canada, as many as 45% of women by 2030 will be unmarried and have no interest in becoming mothers. Do you see a connection here between, let's say, the overreaching, overweening liberalism and really destroying conservative values, or do you agree that maybe this is that I'm misinterpreting something as a conflict, that it actually is symmetrical?
Leighton, this is such a complex topic. You really see a disintegration of civilizational values in the Western society. People, promiscuity has gone by leaps and bounds. People have become, as Peyman earlier said, there's a sinful nature has emerged, because once you remove the civilizational fences, the sinful nature, the animalistic nature of human beings emerges. And that has led to make people very nihilistic, very selfish, and they are not happy either. People are very unhappy. With these women who are childless are very happy. I'm currently in Philadelphia, and I met a woman yesterday in my lobby. And she was talking about getting artificially inseminated because she has waited too long and she wants to freeze her eggs. So she's here to she's visiting the hospital for that. And we have taught women that they can delay marriage until much later in life. They can delay having children until much later in life. And this does not even meet this does not even meet the test of medical science. Women should have children earlier in life rather than later in life, because their body cannot have children that easily later. But also their eggs and the quality of sperms deteriorate with time as well. So we have really misguided women and men both by encouraging them to play around, to live a swinging lifestyle. And I think one core issue in my mind has been that we have given up Christianity, which kept these values in place. And I think I admire Islam, and I don't like Islam. I think it does not fit in well with the Western society. But I admire Islam for a couple of things. They want to keep their family unit together. They don't give in that easily to the sinful nature of human beings. And they want to protect their society, but also they accept that politics and religion cannot be separated. I disagree with people who say that politics and religion can be separated, because you would be hypocritical if those two things could be separated. So despite that, I don't necessarily like many of the things to do with Islam. I certainly think that they are a bulwark against wokeism, at least in their own societies. And they have been able to create reasonably good societies, as in UAE, in Bahrain, and in Oman. So, we should actually learn a few things from them as well.
Fascinating. Well, I've kept you gentlemen for quite a while here. I want to finish off with getting your take on some solutions. Maybe start with you, Peyman. What do you see as some practical short and long-term solutions to mass immigration and the problems that it's causing in Canada and in the West?
Ever since joining the People's Party, I don't really have a political background, but I've noticed that our main challenge on this side, I'm going to call it the freedom side, the limited government side, is that we can't message effectively. So I alluded to this earlier. We don't really define what a culture is. And if you don't have that, and if you operate in the media landscape that's kind of been created over the last few decades, maybe since World War II, we're at a disadvantage. So I think, as silly as this sounds, like, if we want to fix the immigration system, we have to go to people and we have to explain to them what immigration is. It's not something that falls from the heavens. It's not something that's existed from time immemorial. It's a tool. It's a tool in our toolkit, and we use it to solve a certain task. But that tool is not working. And maybe it worked in the past. It's not working right now. We've been bringing in people apparently to deal with an aging population. Well, it hasn't helped with that. We're bringing them in to prop up this Canada pension plan. That's not a sustainable solution. So I think we need some honesty, some transparency, and definitely better messaging and marketing. And from there, then we can say, all right, like, these are our goals. Like, do we really want to, if we want to commit suicide, cultural suicide, at least we can be honest and we can say, by 2040, white Canadians are going to be 10% of the population. And, that's great. We want that. But they're not being honest about that. Mm-hmm. So that's where I would start.
Jay, what do you think? What are there some realistic solutions to mass migration? Obviously, one of them would be, as Max says, to put a moratorium on immigration to Canada for a while. But are there other short and long-term solutions that you see that perhaps could reverse some of the damage and alleviate some of it?
Well, Leighton, it is far too late, actually, to look for solutions. We have really destroyed Canada. Close to 40 to 50% of Canadian population now is of people who came from the third world. Now, third world countries are third world countries because of certain animalistic values that they hold as supreme. And you have pretty much imported those values. Third world people are third world not because of their tyrants, but because third world people create tyranny. And you have brought in those kind of people. So unfortunately, it is too late in my view. But even then, there is some actions you can take. And the actions are that if you look at Japan or Singapore or Hong Kong or United Arab Emirates or other Middle Eastern countries, they bring in workers as well, but they don't give citizenship that easily. In fact, it is impossible to get citizenship of Japan or Korea or of Middle Eastern countries. And I have actually lived in some of these countries for years. So at least stop giving up citizenship that easily. I lived in Canada for 3 years and I had my passport. Now, very good for me, but is that necessarily good for the Canadian society? And my answer is no.
Fascinating. It sort of proves something that is said in the Gospels, Mark chapter 3, verse 27. No man can enter into a strong man's house and spoil his goods, except he will first bind the strong man, and then he will spoil his house. And it seems to be that's kind of an apt description of what we've allowed to happen in Canada through mass immigration. I want to thank both of our guests, our distinguished guests, esteemed guests, for being on this live stream today. I hope you've enjoyed this discussion and that you'll share it. As Jay said, this is very important that we have the courage to have these difficult conversations. And while we have free speech in this country, and we may not have it much longer under Bill C-63, I think we have to continue to have these conversations and share our thoughts about what's happening around us. Because when we stop doing that, really all is lost. We want to preserve Canada. We want to preserve its traditions. We want to preserve our freedoms. And most of all, we want to preserve our culture. And we want to be able to provide that culture and share it with the rest of the world. And that can't be done if it simply becomes an artifact of history. So I want to thank both of you gentlemen. Thank you so much for being on our program. I look forward to speaking to both of you again and wish you much continued success in all of your endeavors. Thank you for being on our program today.
Thank you very much.